So thanks, everyone. I'm here today to talk about a couple of things: sustainable aviation fuel and also nuclear energy. But before we begin, I'd like to take everyone back to 1981 and to the invention of the IBM PC. And when this thing first came out, people weren't really sure what to do with it. And it was only when Lotus 123 brought out the spreadsheet that suddenly every office in every country wanted to have an IBM PC. And it was kind of a similar situation with the Macintosh when that came out in 1984. You turn it on, it'd greet you with a beautiful smiley face and had an amazing graphical user interface, but nobody was really sure what to do with it. And it was only when desktop publishing came out that Macintoshes started to really sell. And I'm here today to argue that sustainable fuels are potentially the killer application for nuclear and not necessarily domestic energy production, and we'll see why. So I'm Alasdair from Carbon Neutral Fuels. My co-founder Sophie is over there in the back with the purple t-shirt. And Sophie and I met at COP26 in Glasgow. And Sophie and I were there campaigning on behalf of nuclear energy. And the message that we were trying to spread is that this is an amazing technology and it needs to be a big part of how we reach net zero. And a year later after COP, I approached Sophie and said, "Do you want to try and do something really big?" And she said, "Sure." And so our mission is that we want to replace fossil fuels with a carbon neutral alternative. How we're going to do that is we're viewing it as an integration challenge. So we want to bring together the best technologies that we can to do this and then scale them globally. And our first sort of target industry is the aviation sector. And the reason is that aviation is seeing huge growth, but it's one of the hardest sectors to decarbonize. And the IEA states that it's not on track to meet its decarbonization targets. And there's some amazing stats on this slide, and one of them is that 80% of people have never been on a plane. And that's obviously going to change as the world gets richer. And yeah, it's a big challenge. And so today, aviation is about 2.5% of global CO2 emissions, but if we don't do something, it can actually rise to be 25% of the carbon budget by 2050. And the reason that aviation is so hard to decarbonize is to do with energy density. This graph here, it shows kerosene, which is jet fuel on the left. Per liter, it stores 35 megajoules of energy, which is 10 times more than a lithium-ion battery. And so if you try and do a battery-powered plane, it's just not going to have the range that you've got with a kerosene-powered plane. Hydrogen's a bit better, but you're still looking at a huge redesign of an airplane. So rather than try and switch technologies with aviation, what if you could decarbonize the fuel and produce a carbon-neutral jet fuel? And that's what we're looking to do, and that's what the sector is looking to do. Now, for short haul, we're going to see electric and hydrogen planes, and we're starting to see those, and that's really exciting. But kerosene allows an Airbus A380, which weighs 500 tons, and it carries 500 passengers, to stay in the sky for 18 hours or more as it circumnavigates the globe. And you're just not going to be able to do that with a battery. And so for long-haul aviation, it really has no choice but to do sustainable aviation fuel. So there's two main pathways for producing sustainable aviation fuel. The first is biomass and vegetable oils. And with that, nature produces the fuel. And the other way is to do it synthetically through e-fuels. Biofuels we've been doing for a long time. If you fill up your car in a forecourt, you'll probably get about 10% ethanol today. It's a mature technology, but there's limits to how much you can scale it because you need a lot of land to grow the biomass on. But with synthetic fuels, you do this by basically converting electricity into stored chemical energy, and it doesn't use as much land, and it has a very low environmental impact. But the challenge is the facilities are first of a kind, so it's quite expensive. And if we look at the industry bodies and what's projected, we see fossil fuels today with some vegetable oils, and over the next 30 years, we see the kind of biomass route growing. But a lot of bodies are predicting that e-fuels are going to be the dominant way of producing sustainable aviation fuel in the future. So to produce this fuel, we decided to form a consortium with an amazing engineering company, IO Consulting, and also an amazing direct air capture company, Mission Zero. We've applied to the Department of Transport's Advanced Fuels Fund and were awarded 1.4 million in September of last year to design a first-of-a-kind facility for making this sustainable e-fuel. And it's a huge opportunity for the UK. There's an industry body called Sustainable Aviation, and they put out a SAF roadmap, and they're basically saying that by 2030 it could represent a 1.8 billion market, growing to 10 billion by 2050. And I actually think it could be a lot bigger than that. But the challenge is that e-fuels require a lot of energy. Kerosene carries a lot of energy, and so to produce it, it makes sense that it would take a lot of energy. And to put some numbers to this, the entire UK electricity grid consumes around 40 gigawatts. And if we were to produce all of the UK's 15 billion litres per year via this process, you would need 60 gigawatts of electricity. So that's 50% more electricity than we produce today just to make jet fuel. And for sure, we're going to see a huge role for renewables doing this. You know, the UK is a wind superpower, but the amount of electricity that would be needed to do this is vast. And these things take time, and renewables are not without their challenges. And so we see a big opportunity for alternatives to this. You may have seen at COP28 in the UAE, 30 countries came together, including the US, Canada, France, the UK, and various others, to commit to saying that we need to triple nuclear energy capacity worldwide by 2050. And this was pretty unprecedented because nuclear has basically been absent at the COP conferences up until now. And a lot of people have been trying to get to net zero with renewables alone. And we can see from examples like Germany, who have been trying to phase out nuclear and go renewables only, that that is an incredibly difficult challenge. And I think this is a recognition of that challenge, and that people are facing up to the reality that we're going to need all low-carbon energies to do this. And you might ask, well, nuclear energy, we've heard it's too expensive, it takes too long to build it, it's dangerous, and it produces nasty waste. And I'd say, well, let's dig into that a bit. Is that true? Our World in Data is an amazing treasure trove of information, and they put together this graph. And on the left-hand side, you can see the death rates from per unit of energy produced. And you can see coal and fossil fuels are incredibly dangerous. But in spite of Fukushima and Chernobyl, nuclear energy actually, if you run the numbers, comes out slightly safer than wind. The only thing that beats it is solar, and that kind of runs against people's beliefs about nuclear. And it's kind of similar to aviation, where people maybe fear it, but flying in a plane is far safer than driving. And interestingly, nuclear energy comes out best when you consider greenhouse gas emissions, and it's got a lower greenhouse gas emission profile than wind or solar, which often surprises people. But before I go to the next slide, I want all of you to think of in your head a car from the 1960s or 1970s, let's say a Datsun, and it has no side impact bars, it has no airbag, it's got an AM radio, it doesn't even have a computer on board. It's an incredibly primitive piece of technology designed by slide rules. And a lot of the nuclear plants are of a similar vintage and are reaching the end of their lives. And when people think of nuclear, they have a lot of techno-pessimism, that all of these challenges are too hard to solve. But when we come to renewables, there's a huge amount of techno-optimism that every problem can be solved. And that's not necessarily true. No technology stays put. All technologies advance, and it's the same for nuclear. And so we see some amazing technologies coming through, and the latest generation of nuclear reactors, the Generation 4 designs, have some incredible features. One main feature is that they can't melt down. You know, no matter what accident happens to them, you will never get an accident that has happened historically, and that makes them safe to build. The small modular reactors and advanced modular reactors can be mass-produced, and if you ask anyone in any industry, how do you make it cheap? It's Control-C, Control-V, and just build as many of them as you can. Don't do a Hinkley Point C, basically. They can also produce high-temperature process heat, which is perfect for an e-fuels plant. And another thing is that some Gen 4 designs can actually burn existing nuclear waste. Existing nuclear waste is 95% unburned uranium, and you can run that through an advanced reactor. And if you only take out the fission products and store those are only dangerous for 300 years. And you can store those above ground in a cask, and after 300 years, you can just bury it in your back garden. It's no longer radioactive. And we have buildings older than 300 years. And so we see a future where e-fuel facilities can be co-located with advanced modular reactors. The nice thing about an e-fuels facility is that it can offer a 20-year power purchase agreement, which is an incredibly amazing thing for any power plant to get. It gives you revenue certainty for an incredibly long time. And that means that you don't depend on government. You don't need a contracts for difference mechanism. And that means that these things can potentially be privately financed, which is unheard of in the nuclear sector. And we're starting to see these kind of things happening. Dow Chemical is working with X Energy in the US to privately finance them. And we also see Community Nuclear up north are looking to do a privately funded nuclear reactor as well. And I think I'm out of time, so I'm just going to close by saying that I think the landscape's going to change massively over the next couple of years. We're going to start to see privately funded nuclear plants providing power for the chemical industry and the e-fuel sector. And if anyone wants to learn more about how to do this, come find us. We're close to the main stage at the front right, H77. Thank you very much.